There are times when taking a step backward is actually taking a step forward. Welcome to Caribbeanology. Hi, Caribbeanologists. Welcome to another video here at Caribbeanology. And today I want to talk about a topic that um, has been meaning a lot to me. I guess you can say over the past few years. It's not just recently. Let me just let you see my little West Indies shirt with all the various flags of different countries. Unfortunately, my flag is not there from the U.S. Virgin Islands. But anyway, well, the topic I want to talk about today, it's a topic that has weighed on my mind. Now, I've got to go back and give a little bit of a history, which I've mentioned in a few of my other videos, in the fact that while I was born on the island of St. Thomas in the United States Virgin Islands, I was raised on another island known as St. Kitts, where my father's from. And I was raised in a rural area of that island, and very rural back in those days when St. Kitts was still under the British flag. And when I say rural, I mean that I grew up without, well, the first few years, I grew up without indoor plumbing. I grew up without electricity. I had to do a lot of reading here at in front of a kerosene lamp, and that's just the way I grew up. And it's something that I would never change, or I would not go back and change it for the life of me, because it's something I actually enjoy. If you see me looking over here all the time, that's because I'm here in the office today. Even though there's a lockdown all around me outside, I'm considered an essential worker, so that's why I'm here. Anyway, that's where I grew up. Now, despite the fact that I grew up in such a rural location, on a small island out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean somewhere, the Caribbean Sea, I have spent the overwhelming majority of my life living in the United States. I spent, 8 years in St. Kitts, and I spent probably about 6 or 7 years in St. Thomas, where I was actually born, and all the rest of my life, from my late teens well into adulthood, has been lived in the United States. And what if I tell you that though I've lived in the United States all of these years, that I still feel out of place? I still don't feel at home. I still feel like a big part of me is just not here. Like, I'm just here going through the motions, but I am not living my best life. And I don't mean best life in terms of having lots of money, having lots of cars. I've had all of that type of stuff, you know? I'm not referring to it like that. I'm talking about living life, like life. I know for some people, living life is I have a big house somewhere, I have lots of money stuffed in a bank, I go to Vegas and gamble money away, and that's life for some people. Or I go to parties and I'm at the club every weekend, and you know, for some people, great. I'm not going to stop anyone from doing that or rain anyone on anyone's parade, but it's not exactly me. Life for me, and I guess it has a lot to do with how my mind was shaped growing up in a rural location, growing up with green mountains ahead of me and the Atlantic Ocean down the street from me, and growing up in between cane fields, actually, and growing up at a time when life was much simpler. And I guess that has meant so much to me and has carried on all the way through my life. So this is one of the reasons why when I think of certain places in the world that I have gone to, like Guyana or back to the Caribbean, I feel at peace, I feel at home, I feel whole. And despite the fact living in the United States and having all the creature comforts, you know, I don't have to worry about the lights going off. internet is always on, that people in other parts of the world may be frustrated about. Those things don't exactly excite me, so to speak. And how do I know this to be true? That I have gone to places like Guyana, um, into the countryside, where I had no access to the internet. Where, well, that's changed now, but at the time didn't have any access to the internet at that time. Where I wasn't sitting on my laptop or my computer, browsing around or anything like that. And I didn't miss it. I really did not miss it. I actually, the only thing I wanted to do was to take photos, take videos, and when I got the chance to upload them so I can show people, um, the fun that I'm having in such a simple environment. That's all I needed it for. I wasn't interested in what's going on Facebook. I wasn't interested in what's going on Instagram. So, this is why, for a person like me, and again, this is not for everyone, and I know not everyone is like that, and I know not everyone thinks like I think, but that to me was great. Again, I know some people who it's more or less like, hey, I've got to have my internet, I've got to have my electricity running. I mean, going all the time. I can't have blackouts. And I do realize for some people that's that may interrupt their work and so forth. But I don't really need to have all of that. And I say that all of that because it surrounds this, and they don't really tie in because I'm not trying to imply that this place I'm going to talk about, it's like behind the times or it's not up to speed or anything like that. I'm not trying to imply that. But I just want to point out how that place would probably make me feel. Now, here's what's going on. It's that over the past few weeks, since this coronavirus lockdown and everything, I have been binge watching videos on YouTube. And I am a geography buff. I love to study and learn about different places in the world. I am not one of those people that have issues with people. I'll get along with just about anyone. If you come at me good, we're good. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what religion you are. It does not matter to me. I've always been that way. So I've just been watching videos on so many different things. So I was watching videos on Europe, and I love history, by the way. I'm a geography buff, and I also love history. So I was watching a lot of videos dealing with history. So there I am watching videos on Peter the Great from Russia. I'm watching Ivan the Terrible from Russia. I'm watching videos about Portugal, about Spain, about the various wars, different things. Eventually, as I'm going through watching all these videos, I eventually get around to Africa. And one of the first few videos that I saw was a video on Maputo, which is the capital of Mozambique. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, when it comes to Africa, I think people get certain images in their mind. I'm going to get back to Mozambique and Maputo in a minute, but I think people get certain images in mind. I think, one, if you hear a person living on this side of the world who seems like they have an interest in Africa, you tend to get the impression that, one, they're some kind of militant. Everything is Africa, 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 and they hate white people. You think it's another image you may have in your mind. You think it's a person that's walking around in a kente cloth all day long, and all they talk about is Africa, and I want to go back to Africa. You get that impression of them. Or you may get the impression that the person is just some weirdo who just talking about this backward place over there called Africa. Like, what good is in Africa? All we see on television is just war and poverty and everything like that and a bunch of dirt. What's the big deal about Africa? I think those are the impressions we may get about certain people sometimes when it comes to them and their love or their talk about Africa. But in reality, a lot of people are not like any of those things. A lot of people that may have a passion to move back to a place like Africa, to move to a place like Africa, look just like me. Just regular everyday people dressed in jeans and whatever shoes, Jordans and whatever, you know. They're not walking around with this militant, angry face or anything like that. And I also forgot to mention one other thing, considering where I come from in the world. We also think that if it's a person talking about Africa, it's probably some Rasta man walking around the place talking about Ethiopia, here I come, and whatever, you know. It's not all that. Ethiopia is not Africa, and Africa is not just Ethiopia. Um, Great nation, but it's not just that. But anyway, getting back to Maputo, I started watching the video, and one other thing I have to mention is the fact that lighting is horrible here now because my computer just went off. Just hold on 1 second. Let me just log it back in because I was depending on the lighting from my computer to help me out here. Just bear with me. Anyway, so I was there looking at the video, and I have to admit that when it comes to us on the western side, I'm sorry, in the Americas, and when I say the Americas, I'm talking about here in the United States and Canada and Central America, South America, the Caribbean. So many of us know that we have our roots. So many of us black people know we have our roots in the western part of Africa, Western, West Central Africa, and so forth. We know that's where a lot of our roots came from. So I think a lot of focus by us is generally in West Africa. And if we think of East Africa, we tend to think more of only places like Egypt and Ethiopia. Egypt because of all the past glories that we heard about, the great Egyptian civilizations of the past. And then we think of Ethiopia because of, some religious reason, or because we have a lot, because the whole reggae culture, at least where I come from, initially was wrapped around the whole Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia. So I think when we think of East Africa, that's about as far as we go. And that's more or less like Northeast Africa. Well, here I am looking at a video of Maputo, and this is in Mozambique, and this is in Southeast Africa. And I'm looking and I'm like, wait, Maputo? I'm like, am I looking at Miami Beach or am I looking at a place in Africa? It actually surprised me. And it doesn't mean that I don't know where Mozambique is. I tend to know the continent pretty well, where the various countries are. But again, I've never really paid much attention to East Africa outside of perhaps Kenya, because I do have a few friends from there. And I'm also not the type of person that thinks Africa is just jungle and animals. I know better than that. I know that there are beautiful places over there. I know there are beautiful communities over there that would make some communities in the United States look like crap. But anyway, here I am looking at East Africa, and I'm looking at a place like Maputo, and I'm looking at a vibrant, modern city, looking really nice, looking very clean, and it sparked my interest, and I started looking at some more videos, and I'm like, wow, this is really nice, So then from there, I started looking at videos from Tanzania, and I started looking at Kenya a little bit more, but more Mombasa. I knew about Nairobi, but I started looking at places like Mombasa. I started looking at places like Uganda. And eventually, I drew down to South Africa. Because, the last memories I had of South Africa was the slums in Soweto, and that's about it. Even though I didn't know that there were nice places down there. But I looked at a video and started looking out at at other parts of South Africa, outside of Johannesburg, outside of Pretoria, outside of Cape Town. And I looked and I was like, wow, this is an amazingly beautiful country, diverse in its landscape and everything. I just thought, wow, this place is gorgeous. And of course, there's West Africa, that I've known about before. Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire. So I started looking at those places and I was just like, wow, this place is amazing. Then I started watching videos of people who have moved to Africa, people who've given their opinions about what their move has been like since they've moved back or moved to Africa. For the most part, most things have been positive. Now, I'm saying all that to say this because for some people, which is what I mentioned in my opening, for some people, they may look at moving to a place like Africa, or for people from the Caribbean moving back to the Caribbean, as being a step backward. And I don't exactly think that's always true. We have bought into this idea that that England, that Canada, that the United States, they're the lands of milk and honey. And I think we have believed this for so long that it's a lingering legacy that is on shaky ground, while other parts of the world have just been improving and progressing. And we're not aware of it because we've been grabbed and say, hey, look over here only. Look at the United States. Look at England. This is where it's at. And one way I can tell this is even in the Caribbean where I came from, or where I come from. When I was growing up, being from the United States Virgin Islands, it was like here you were born on an American island in the middle of the Caribbean. And it was like there was this idea that, hey, we're under the US flag. The rest of you islands are not as privileged as we are. And I know this to be true because when I was growing up and I went back home to St. Kitts, where my father was from, where I was raised actually, and I went back to Nevis, where my mother is from, I remember being a little boy and people were still cooking in coal pots. People were still using bathrooms on the outside, just like how I grew up, you know. In St. Thomas, we had toilets, we had televisions we can watch. And that wasn't the case in some of these other islands. And we're talking about over a 25 to 30 year period, 35 years, you know. And you know, it used to be like when you came off of a plane and you came from the United States, it's almost like people like, wow, you know, he's an American. Hey, he's from the United States. He came from New York. He came from St. Thomas. He came from Miami. Oh, bow down, you know, because he's coming from civilization and he's coming back here to pass out a few dollars to us poor people. And then this happened. I go back to Nevis, I think back in 2002 or somewhere back there. And I wasn't there since like the late 70s as a little boy sometime, somewhere back there. And when I go back, I'm looking around and I'm looking at some of my cousins, and they have these big houses and they have their big televisions and they have nicer things than I do living in the United States. And I'm like, wait, when did this happen? That is basically how it is when I look at places like Africa. You know, one minute you looked and it was like war, civil war, strife, poverty. It was all of that going on, you know? And I think that image has lingered in a lot of people's minds. That's all that's going on over there. Nothing good is going on over there. Oh, just a bunch of slums and everybody fighting and there's wars and there's coups and everything like that. And I think when you take another look and you took a real good look, you realize that, wait a minute, that's not exactly the story anymore. These places have progressed. When I looked at the video of Maputo, and this is not denying that Africa did not go through its growing pains, just like in the Caribbean where I'm from. We may not have had all out wars and everything like that, but a lot of political tension. And that's a whole story and a whole subject for another day, how colonialism had a lot of effect on what happened to a lot of these countries in the Caribbean and in Africa as they came into their own in independence. But that's a story for another day. But when you look at these countries now, you're looking and it's like, wow, Maputo, wow, Nairobi, ooh, Lagos, you know, or like, wow, Johannesburg. You know, you're looking and you're just seeing some amazing things going on over there. And the way I look at it, and this is, I guess, where the crux of all of this goes on. So many of us, or so many people probably there, and this is something that used to happen with my cousins. I think the way they look at it is like, well, if I have this 4-bedroom house over here on a hillside with this beautiful view, well, hey, you must have something 10 times more magnificent than this. And the reality is, I think a lot of people can tell you who are in the diaspora can probably tell you that we're not exactly living in the United States, England, or Canada. We're just surviving. We are somewhat out there. And here's what I mean by that. First of all, you come here to the country that's predominantly white. you're already a minority in that regard. And then you were not really born in the country, or you did not grow up in the country. You might have come here, like for me, after high school, or you may have come here at a much older time, and you come over and you're here, and now even the black people in the country, you're not exactly acclimated, or you're not exactly familiar with their culture. And then you have the white folks over here, you're not familiar with theirs either. You're familiar with what you remember back home. And especially if you come to the cold places where you're so accustomed to your beaches back home, you're so accustomed to certain things, and you come over and you just feel out of place, which is how I feel. So I think a lot of times people from home thinking, hey, you must be really having a great life over there. If I'm having this over here, you must really be living a great life over there, because look at what I have. I have 2 cars out front. I have a nice home. You must have 10 cars over there and a much bigger home than this. And that's not always the case. So when I look back, and I've been looking at these videos, looking at these stories, I am looking and I'm watching these people carefully, and these people are just regular, everyday people. No, they're not walking with kente cloths on. Not everyone, obviously, and nothing is wrong with that. I'm just saying that there are people over there just living just like how I am, dressed just like how I am, into the same fashions that I'm into the same kind of music that I'm into. You look around, they're eating at McDonald's just like I am. They're sitting around in stores that you're familiar with. They're on their iPhones. They're on their Galaxies. And you're just like, wow. And what I've been noticing is that these places have been growing. These places are growing up behind our backs, on our noses, however you may want to look at it. While we're here, like United States, land of milk and honey. Canada, land of milk and honey. England, land of milk and honey. Not realizing that these other places, not exactly realizing that there are other places in this world that is just blowing up. And one of the things that I love about over there's so many young people, and there are people who have gone abroad, become educated, and taken that education back home to Africa, to the Caribbean. And my whole thing is this is home for us, and we leave and we go somewhere else to enrich another country, to make another country greater. And this is where it bothers me so much, is when I meet certain people who are not from where I'm from, and I meet them and they've been to where I'm from. They're like, oh, why did you leave that beautiful island? And I've always thought to myself, here I am coming to your country to enrich your business, to make you rich, that you can take the riches I help you make, that you can go to where I come from to vacation and buy land or buy a house. So you're going to where I am from to enjoy your best life, and I'm over here struggling, working for you, whether I'm a janitor in one of your office buildings, or I'm a nanny for your children or something like that. But then when you get a chance, it's like, hey, we're going on our family vacation. We're taking our yacht down to St. Martin. We're taking our yacht down to Jamaica, where we're going to go have a blast. Why? Why can't I do that? That's where I come from. These people clamor to come to where I come from, to get away from the madness. And they go over there to enjoy themselves. And we're over here in the cold, sweating, whatever the case might be. So my whole thing is, I don't want to shun the idea that where we come from, it has to be any less than where we are today. Again, it's just me. But again, looking at these videos from out of Africa and looking at the young people that are there, looking at the vibrancy, and I'm not trying to say that they don't have issues, just like everywhere else. And I'm sure there are young people over there, as you know, who are trying to get out from certain places, and they're clamoring to go to Europe and so forth. And you hear the stories of people trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea, trying to get into certain parts, because yes, they do have their issues. There's some places where there's still poverty in certain pockets. There's still places where there want to be dictators, but it's just unwritten, who are driving people crazy over there, and they want to get away from that type of stuff. But in certain parts, there's certain good things that are going on. And changing your country or changing where you come from for the better, you don't change it by running away. Now, for me, I didn't run away. It's just that when I was a young boy coming out of high school, I realized I had to get out of my mom's house. And the only thing back then was like, I'm on a smaller island. What am I going to do? It's like, hey, you followed everybody else and ran off to the United States. Then you get over, and next thing you know, you're somewhat stuck. You get into family, you whatever, you have children, and before you know it, you're kind of like bogged down and can't do maybe what you would want to do or get back to what you would like to get back to. But all I'm just simply saying is that we should not rule it out that taking that step supposedly backward can actually be a step forward. And there's so many of us here, but I think what happens is that a lot of us are tied down, just like with a job, you know. We know we have passions, we know we have desires, but it's like, hey, this 9 to 5 over here is stable. I'm afraid to throw my anchor out there because I don't know how deep it's going to go. I don't know what's going to happen. So you don't want to take the chance. You want to play it safe and stay where you are. But yet, in your mind, you know you're not feeling whole. You know you don't feel like 100%. You know something is missing. And I'm not saying that you're going to go back to where you come from and it's going to be like how you were when you were 14 or 15. No. With the age of innocence, when everything was great, you hung out with your friends on the block, that's probably not going to be there anymore. Not probably, it's most likely not going to be there anymore. And I know we might be chasing a fantasy. We may be chasing a romance idea of how things used to be. I do realize that. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, so to speak, I still think that we can go back and we can make a difference. And if we don't go back to where we come from, in terms of where we were born, we can go back to places where our ancestry came from, and we can make a difference there. Because one thing I will say about Africa is, at least when you go there, you're around people that look like you. You're around people who will probably be familiar with certain foods that you're familiar with, that have a similarity in culture. So there could be a camaraderie right off the bat. Here, you may end up in the middle of Kansas. You may end up in the middle of Winnipeg somewhere, and people are looking at you out of the corner of their eyes. Or you're running into racism and different things that may go on, and you always feel that you are not a part. And if the right situation comes up, you realize that they let you know right off the bat, you're not one of us. But that is just my opinion. That is just my feeling. So when I watch these videos about people in Africa or people moving back to the Caribbean, I am not knocking them. And it doesn't mean that these people who've done something like this, it's like they were a failure in the United States or they were a failure. That's not always the case. Yes, sometimes people come over, things don't materialize, and they go back home, and they may feel like they're going back home with their tails between their legs. You don't have to feel that way. Because I've known of people who've gone back and have done far better there than they were doing over here. But those are just my thoughts. Anyway, if you have anything to say about this, you can go ahead and you can comment down below. You can also go ahead and share this, and you can also subscribe. That's the most important part. I would love to have you subscribe. So I'll be putting up videos here quite often when it comes to Caribbeanology. And I hope you found this interesting, and I hope it could just develop into a matter of discussion. Lots of things I've left out. I'm already pretty much at 30 minutes, and I know some people can't watch a video past a couple minutes. So I'm so sorry, but I hope you made it all the way to the end, and if you did, I thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to share. Don't forget to comment, okay? You guys take care until the next video here in Caribbeanology.